report China, Russia, and others developing super EMP bombs. A new congressional report claims China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are making nuclear bombs powerful enough to create super electromagnetic pulse (EMP) waves that can destroy electronics over wide swaths of land. According to the Washington Free Beacon, the countries have nuclear EMP weapons built into their military plans. Nuclear EMP attack is part of the military doctrines, plans, and exercises of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran for a revolutionary new way of warfare against military forces and civilian critical infrastructures by cyber, sabotage, and EMP, reads the report from the Commission to assess the threat to the United States from EMP attack. This new way of warfare is called many things by many nations, and Russia, China, and Iran it is called sixth-generation warfare, non-contact warfare, electronic warfare, total information warfare, and cyber warfare. The nuclear bombs being developed, according to the report, could take out all electronics, ranging from computers and cell phones to entire electric grids, over several hundred miles. The EMP attacks would involve detonating nuclear weapons far above the ground, which would then send EMP pulses to the Earth and knock offline all electronics in their path. A single nuclear weapon can potentially make an EMP attack against a target the size of North America, the report reads. Any nuclear weapon detonated at an altitude of 30 kilometers or higher will generate a potentially catastrophic EMP. EMP attacks will be carried out at such high altitudes they will produce no blast or other immediate effects harmful to humans. Instead, three types of EMP waves in seconds damage electronics, and the strikes are regarded by adversaries as not an act of nuclear war. Potential adversaries understand that millions could die from the long-term collateral effects of EMP and cyber attacks that cause protracted blackout of national electric grids and other life-sustaining critical infrastructures, the report said. The attacks are regarded by enemy military planners as a relatively easy, potentially unattributable means of inflicting mass destruction and forcing opponents to capitulate. EMP strikes can be adjusted in the size of the area and the intensity of the wave by detonating at different altitudes. The closer to the Earth the more powerful is the pulse. The higher the altitude, the wider the area of impact.
If that weren't enough to make you wonder if things are going on, this definitely will. Enjoy the video.
Top Secret Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, an Introductory Programming Manual. Operations Research Technical Manual Trademark SW790. Welcome aboard. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, being conducted using subjective biological warfare, fought with silent weapons. This book contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. Security. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, that is, the engineering of social automation systems, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, that is, slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public, uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity, and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. Historical introduction. Silent weapon technology has evolved from operations research, OR, a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies, that is, logistics. It was soon recognized by those in positions of power that the same methods might be useful for totally controlling a society. But better tools were necessary. Social engineering, the analysis and automation of a society, requires the correlation of great amounts of constantly changing economic information, data, so a high-speed computerized data processing system was necessary which could race ahead of the society and predict when society would arrive for capitulation. Relay computers were too slow, but the electronic computer, invented in 1946 by J. Presper Eckart and John W. Mauchly, filled the bill. The next breakthrough was the development of the simplex method of linear programming in 1947 by the mathematician George B. Dantzig. Then in 1948, the transistor, invented by J. Bardeen, W. H. Protein, and W. Shockley, promised great expansion of the computer field by reducing space and power requirements. With these three inventions under their direction, those in positions of power strongly suspected that it was possible for them to control the whole world with the push of a button. Immediately, the Rockefeller Foundation got in on the ground floor by making a 4-year grant to Harvard College, funding the Harvard Economic Research Project for the study of the structure of the American economy. 1 year later, in 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. In 1952 the grant period terminated, and the high-level meeting of the elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. The Harvard Project had been very fruitful, as is borne out by the publication of some of its results in 1953 suggesting the feasibility of economic, social, engineering. Engineered in the last half of the decade of the 1940s, the new quiet war machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor by 1954. With the creation of the maser in 1954, the promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy from the heavy hydrogen in seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power was a possibility only decades away. The combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. Although the silent weapons system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks. This volume marks the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the Quiet War. Already this domestic war has had many victories on many fronts throughout the world. Political introduction. In 1954 it was well recognized by those in positions of authority that it was only a matter of time, only a few decades, before the general public would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power. for the very elements of the new silent weapon technology were as accessible for a public utopia as they were for providing a private utopia. The issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolved around the subject of the energy sciences. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed greater than economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science. And the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary? In 1954 this was the issue of primary concern. Although the so-called moral issues were raised, in view of the law of natural selection it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure, and apply new weapons which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research, as conducted by the magnates of capital, banking, and the industries of commodities, goods, and services, is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control, that is, must be housebroken, trained, and assigned the yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age, before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the mode of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little if any hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Descriptive introduction of the silent weapon. Everything that is expected from an ordinary weapon is expected from a silent weapon by its creators, but only in its own manner of functioning. It shoots situations, instead of bullets, propelled by data processing, instead of chemical reaction, explosion, originating from bits of data, instead of grains of gunpowder from a computer, instead of a gun, operated by a computer programmer, instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate, instead of a military general. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious physical or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with the daily social life, that is, unmistakable to a trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public cannot comprehend this weapon, and therefore cannot believe that they are being attacked and subdued by a weapon. The public might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but that is because of the technical nature of the silent weapon. They cannot express their feeling in a rational way, or handle the problem with intelligence. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help, and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually, the public adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, psychological via economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their sources of natural and social energy, and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. Theoretical introduction. Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, 1743–1812. Today's silent weapons technology is an outgrowth of a simple idea discovered, succinctly expressed, and effectively applied by the quoted Mr. Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mr. Rothschild discovered the missing passive component of economic theory known as economic inductance. He, of course, did not think of his discovery in these 20th century terms, and, to be sure, mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution, the rise of the theory of mechanics and electronics, and finally, the invention of the electronic computer before it could be effectively applied in the control of the world economy. Mr. Rothschild's energy discovery. What Mr. Rothschild had discovered was the basic principle of power, influence, and control over people as applied to economics. That principle is when you assume the appearance of power, people soon give it to you. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency or deposit loan accounts had the required appearance of power that could be used to induce people, inductance, with people corresponding to a magnetic field, into surrendering their real wealth in exchange for a promise of greater wealth, instead of real compensation. They would put up real collateral in exchange for a loan of promissory notes. Mr. Rothschild found that he could issue more notes than he had backing for, so long as he had someone's stock of gold as a persuader to show his customers. Mr. Rothschild loaned his promissory notes to individuals and to governments. These would create overconfidence. Then he would make money scarce, tighten control of the system, and collect the collateral through the obligation of contracts. The cycle was then repeated. These pressures could be used to ignite a war. Then he would control the availability of currency to determine who would win the war. That government which agreed to give him control of its economic system got his support. Collection of debts was guaranteed by economic aid to the enemy of the debtor. The profit derived from this economic methodology made Mr. Rothschild all the more able to expand his wealth. He found that the public greed would allow currency to be printed by government order beyond the limits, inflation, of backing in precious metal or the production of goods and services. Apparent capital as paper inductor. In this structure, credit, presented as a pure element called currency, has the appearance of capital, but is in effect negative capital. Hence, it has the appearance of service, but is in fact, indebtedness or debt. It is therefore an economic inductance instead of an economic capacitance, and if balanced in no other way, will be balanced by the negation of population, war, genocide. The total goods and services represent real capital called the gross national product, and currency may be printed up to this level and still represent economic capacitance, but currency printed beyond this level is subtractive, represents the introduction of economic inductance, and constitutes notes of indebtedness. War is therefore the balancing of the system by killing the true creditors, the public, which we have taught to exchange true value for inflated currency, and falling back on whatever is left of the resources of nature and regeneration of those resources. Mr. Rothschild had discovered that currency gave him the power to rearrange the economic structure to his own advantage, to shift economic inductance to those economic positions which would encourage the greatest economic instability and oscillation. The final key to economic control had to wait until there was sufficient data and high-speed computing equipment to keep close watch on the economic oscillations created by price shocking and excess paper energy credits, paper inductance, inflation, general energy concepts. In the study of energy systems, there always appears three elementary concepts. These are potential energy, kinetic energy, and energy dissipation. And corresponding to these concepts, there are three idealized, essentially pure physical counterparts called passive components. 1. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of potential energy is associated with a physical property called elasticity or stiffness, and can be represented by a stretched spring. In electronic science, potential energy is stored in a capacitor instead of a spring. This property is called capacitance instead of elasticity or stiffness. 2. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of kinetic energy is associated with a physical property called inertia or mass, and can be represented by a mass or a flywheel in motion. In electronic science, kinetic energy is stored in an inductor, in a magnetic field, instead of a mass. This property is called inductance instead of inertia. 3. In the science of physical mechanics, the phenomenon of energy dissipation is associated with a physical property called friction or resistance, and can be represented by a dashpot or other device which converts energy into heat. In electronic science, dissipation of energy is performed by an element called either a resistor or a conductor, the term resistor being the one generally used to describe a more ideal device. For example, wire, employed to convey electronic energy efficiently from one location to another. The property of a resistance or conductor is measured as either resistance or conductance reciprocals. In economics, these three energy concepts are associated with economic capacitance, capital, money, stock, inventory, investments in buildings and durables, etc., economic conductance, goods, production flow coefficients, economic inductance, services, the influence of the population of industry on output, all of the mathematical theory developed in the study of one energy system, for example, mechanics, electronics, etc., can be immediately applied in the study of any other energy system, for example, economics. Breakthrough the aviation field provided the greatest evolution in economic engineering by way of the mathematical theory of shock testing. In this process, a projectile is fired from an airframe on the ground and the impulse of the recoil is monitored by vibration transducers connected to the airframe and wired to chart recorders. By studying the echoes or reflections of the recoil impulse in the airframe, it is possible to discover critical vibrations in the structure of the airframe, which are either vibrations of the engine or aeolian vibrations of the wings, or a combination of the two, might reinforce, resulting in a resonant self-destruction of the airframe in flight as an aircraft. From the standpoint of engineering, this means that the strengths and weaknesses of the structure of the airframe in terms of vibrational energy can be discovered and manipulated. Application in economics. To use this method of airframe shock testing in economic engineering, the prices of commodities are shocked, and the public consumer reaction is monitored. The resulting echoes of the economic shock are interpreted theoretically by computers, and the psycho-economic structure of the economy is thus discovered. It is by this process that partial differential and difference matrices are discovered that define the family household and make possible its evaluation as an economic industry, dissipative consumer structure. Then the response of the household to future shocks can be predicted and manipulated, and society becomes a well-regulated animal with its reins under the control of a sophisticated computer-regulated social energy bookkeeping system. Eventually every individual element of the structure comes under computer control through a knowledge of personal preferences, such knowledge guaranteed by Computer Association of Consumer Preferences, Universal Product Code, UPC, zebra-striped pricing codes on packages, with identified consumers, identified via association with the use of a credit card, and later a permanent tattooed body number invisible under normal ambient illumination. The economic model. The Harvard Economic Research Project, 1948, was an extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy, at first the American economy, and then the world economy. It was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of a projectile. Such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard Project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change that structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, production, distribution, and consumption. To make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for the electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connected to an active inductor is mathematically analogous to the initiation of war. The greatest hurdle which theoretical economists faced was the accurate description of the household as an industry. This is a challenge because consumer purchases are a matter of choice, which in turn is influenced by income, price, and other economic factors. This hurdle was cleared in an indirect and statistically approximate way by an application of shock testing to determine the current characteristics, called current technical coefficients, of a household industry. Finally, because problems in theoretical electronics can be translated very easily into problems of theoretical electronics, and the solution translated back again, it follows that only a book of language translation and concept definition needed to be written for economics. The remainder could be gotten from standard works on mathematics and electronics. This makes the publication of books on advanced economics unnecessary, and greatly simplifies project security. Economic shock testing. In recent times, The application of operations research to the study of the public economy has been obvious for anyone who understands the principles of shock testing. In the shock testing of an aircraft airframe, the recoil impulse of firing a gun mounted on that airframe causes shock waves in that structure, which tell aviation engineers the conditions under which some parts of the airplane or the whole airplane or its wings will start to vibrate or flutter like a guitar string, a flute reed, or a tuning fork, and disintegrate or fall apart in flight. Economic engineers achieved the same result in studying the behavior of the economy and the consumer public by carefully selecting a staple commodity such as beef, coffee, gasoline, or sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, thus kicking everybody's budget and buying habits out of shape. They then observe the shock waves which result by monitoring the changes in advertising, prices, and sales of that and other commodities. The objective of such studies is to acquire the know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion or change, even a controlled self-destructive state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert people should take control of the money system and re-establish security, rather than liberty and justice, for all. When the subject citizens are rendered unable to control their financial affairs, they, of course, become totally enslaved, a source of cheap labor. Not only the prices of commodities, but also the availability of labor can be used as the means of shock testing. Labor strikes deliver excellent test shocks to an economy, especially in the critical service areas of trucking, transportation, communication, public utilities, energy, water, garbage collection, etc. By shock testing, it is found that there is a direct relationship between the availability of money flowing in an economy and the real psychological outlook and response of masses of people dependent upon that availability. For example, there is a measurable quantitative relationships between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is most interesting that, by observing and measuring the economic models by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from reality, and by applying the mathematical theory of operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events, shocks, which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy, by shaking the plum tree. Keep listening. This just gets even more interesting. How far will they go? By the seams in 2019 their agenda is right on point and full steam ahead. Industrial diagrams. An ideal industry is defined as a device which receives value from other industries in several forms and converts them into one specific product for sales and distribution to other industries. It has several inputs and one output. What the public normally thinks of as one industry is really an industrial complex, where several industries under one roof produce one or more products. Three industrial classes. Industries fall into three categories or classes by type of output: class number 1, capital, resources; class number 2, goods, commodities or use, dissipative; class number 3, services, action of population. Class number 1 industries exist at three levels: 1. Nature, sources of energy and raw materials. 2. Government, printing of currency equal to the gross national product, GNP, and extension of currency in excess of GNP. 3. Banking, loaning of money for interest, an extension, inflation/counterfeiting, of economic value through the deposit loan accounts. Class number 2 industries exist as producers of tangible or consumer, dissipated, products. This sort of activity is usually recognized and labeled by the public as industry. Class number 3 industries are those which have service rather than a tangible product as their output. These industries are called 1. Households, and 2. Governments. Their output is human activity of a mechanical sort, and their basis is population. Aggregation. The whole economic system can be represented by a 3-industry model if one allows the names of the outputs to be 1. Capital, 2. Goods, and 3. Services. The problem with this representation is that it would not show the influence, say, the textile industry on the ferrous metal industry. This is because both the textile industry and the ferrous metal industry would be contained within a single classification called the goods industry, and by this process of combining or aggregating these two industries under one system block they would lose their economic individuality. The E model. A national economy consists of simultaneous flows of production, distribution, consumption, and investment. If all of those elements including labor and human functions are assigned a numerical value in like units of measure, say, $1939, then his flow can be further represented by a current flow in an electronic circuit, and its behavior can be predicted and manipulated with useful precision. The 3 ideal passive energy components of electronics, the capacitor, the resistor, and the inductor, correspond to the 3 ideal passive energy components of economics called the pure industries of capital, goods, and services, respectively. Economic capacitance represents the storage of capital in one form or another. Economic conductance represents the level of conductance of materials for the production of goods. Economic inductance represents the inertia of economic value and motion. This is a population phenomenon known as services, economic inductance. An electrical inductor, for example, a coil or wire, has an electric current as its primary phenomenon and a magnetic field as its secondary phenomenon, inertia. Corresponding to this, an economic inductor has a flow of economic value as its primary phenomenon and a population field as its secondary field phenomenon of inertia. When the flow of economic value, for example, money, diminishes, the human population field collapses in order to keep the economic value, money, flowing. Extreme case, war. This public inertia is a result of consumer buying habits, expected standard of living, etc., and is generally a phenomenon of self-preservation. Inductive factors to consider: 1. Population, 2. Magnitude of the economic activities of the government, 3. The method of financing these government activities, the household industry, the industries of finance, banking, manufacturing, and government, real counterparts of the pure industries of capital, goods, and services, are easily defined because they are generally logically structured. Because of this, their processes can be described mathematically and their technical coefficients can be easily deduced. This, however, is not the case with the service industry known as the household industry. Household models. The problem which a theoretical economist faces is that the consumer preferences of any household is not easily predictable, and the technical coefficients of any one household tend to be a nonlinear, very complex, and variable function of income, prices, etc. Computer information derived from the use of the universal product code in conjunction with credit card purchase as an individual household identifier could change the state of affairs, but the UPC method is not yet available on a national or even a significant regional scale. To compensate for this data deficiency, an alternate indirect approach of analysis has been adopted known as economic shock testing. This method, widely used in the aircraft manufacturing industry, develops an aggregate statistical sort of data. Applied to economics, this means that all of the households in one region or in the whole nation are studied as a group or class rather than individually, and the mass behavior rather than the individual behavior is used to discover useful estimates of the technical coefficients governing the economic structure of the hypothetical single household industry. One method of evaluating the technical coefficients of the household industry depends upon shocking the prices of commodity and noting the changes in the sales of all of the commodities. Introduction to economic amplifiers. Economic amplifiers are the active components of economic engineering. The basic characteristic of any amplifier, mechanical, electrical, or economic, is that it receives an input control signal and delivers energy from an independent energy source to a specified output terminal in a predictable relationship to that input control signal. The simplest form of an economic amplifier is a device called advertising. If a person is spoken to by a TV advertiser as if he were a 12-year-old, then, due to suggestibility, he will, with a certain probability, respond or react to that suggestion with the uncritical response of a 12-year-old and will reach into his economic reservoir and deliver its energy to buy that product on impulse when he passes it in the store. An economic amplifier may have several inputs and output. Its response might be instantaneous or delayed. Its circuit symbol might be a rotary switch if its options are exclusive, qualitative, go or an no-go, or it might have its parametric input/output relationship specified by a matrix with internal energy sources represented. Whatever its form might be, its purpose is to govern the flow of energy from a source to an output sink in direct relationship to an input control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit element or component. Economic amplifiers fall into classes called strategies, and, in comparison with electronic amplifiers, the specific internal functions of an economic amplifier are called logistical instead of electrical. Therefore, economic amplifiers not only deliver power gain but also, in effect, are used to cause changes in the economic circuitry. In the design of an economic amplifier we must have some idea of at least 5 functions, which are, 1. The available input signals, 2. The desired output control objectives, 3. The strategic objective, 4. The available economic power sources, 5. The logistical options. The process of defining and evaluating these factors and incorporating the economic amplifier into an economic system has been popularly called game theory. The design of an economic amplifier begins with a specification of the power level of the output, which can range from personal to national. The second condition is accuracy of response, that is, how accurately the output action is a function of the input commands. High gain combined with strong feedback helps to deliver the required precision. Most of the error will be in the input data signal. Personal input data tends to be specified, while national input data tends to be statistical. Amplification energy sources. The next step in the process of designing an economic amplifier is discovering the energy sources. The energy sources which support any primitive economic system are, of course, a supply of raw materials, and the consent of the people to labor and consequently assume a certain rank, position, level, or class in the social structure, that is, to provide labor at various levels in the pecking order. Each class, in guaranteeing its own level of income, controls the class immediately below it, hence preserves the class structure. This provides stability and security, but also government from the top. As time goes on and communication and education improve, the lower class elements of the social labor structure become knowledgeable and envious of the good things that the upper class members have. They also begin to attain a knowledge of energy systems and the ability to enforce their rise through the class structure. This threatens the sovereignty of the elite. If this rise of the lower classes can be postponed long enough, the elite can achieve energy dominance, and labor by consent no longer will hold the position of an essential energy source. Until such energy dominance is absolutely established, the consent of people to labor and let others handle their affairs must be taken into consideration, since failure to do so could cause the people to interfere in the final transfer of energy sources to the control of the elite. It is essential to recognize that at this time, public consent is still an essential key to the release of energy in the process of economic amplification. Consent, the primary victory. A silent weapon system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal, but not always lawful, force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the Internal Revenue Service. See studies in the structure of the American economy for an IRS source list. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organized data contained in federal and state tax forms, collected, assembled, and submitted by slave labor provided by taxpayers and employers. Furthermore, the number of such forms submitted to the IRS is a useful indicator of public consent, an important factor in strategic decision-making. Other data sources are given in the short list of inputs. Consent coefficients, numerical feedback indicating victory status. Psychological basis, when the government is able to collect tax and seize private property without just compensation, it is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. A good and easily quantified indicator of harvest time is the number of public citizens who pay income tax despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service from the government. Diversion, the primary strategy. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the basic system principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by 1. Disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. 2. Engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities, by a. Unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers. B. Giving them what they desire, in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. 3. Rewriting history and law and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in and discovery of the silent weapons of social automation technology. The general rule is that there is a profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer solutions. Diversion summary. Media keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues, and captivated by matters of no real importance. Schools keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. Entertainment keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. Work keep the public busy, with no time to think, back on the farm with the other animals. Table of strategies to this: to get this, keep the public ignorant; to get minds organization, public maintain access control; to get required reaction to output, prices, sales, create preoccupation; to get minds the defenses, attack the family unit; to get control of the education of the young. Give less cash and more credit and goals; to get more self-indulgence and more data; attack the privacy of the church; to get destroy faith in this sort of government. Social conformity; to get computer programming simplicity; minimize the tax protest; to get maximum economic data, minimum enforcement problems. Stabilize the consent; to get simplicity coefficients; tighten control of variables; to get simpler computer input data, greater predictability. Establish boundary conditions; to get problem simplicity, solutions of differential and difference equations. Proper timing; to get less data shift and blurring; maximize control; to get minimum resistance to control. Collapse of currency; to get destroy the faith of the people in each other. Logistics. The successful application of a strategy requires a careful study of inputs, outputs, the strategy connecting the inputs and the outputs, and the available energy sources to fuel the strategy. This study is called logistics. A logistical problem is studied at the elementary level first, and then levels of greater complexity are studied as a synthesis of elementary factors. This means that a given system is analyzed, that is, broken down into its subsystems, and these in turn are analyzed, until by this process, one arrives at the logistical atom, the individual. Short list of inputs. Questions to be answered: 1. What? 2. When? 3. Where? 4. How? 5. Why? 6. Who? General sources of information. 1. Telephone taps. 2. Surveillance. 3. Analysis of garbage. 4. Behavior of children in school. Standard of living by 1. Food. 2. Clothing. 3. Shelter. 4. Transportation. Social contacts. 1. Telephone, itemized record of calls. 2. Family, marriage certificates, birth certificates, etc. 3. Friends, associates, etc. 4. Memberships in organizations. 5. Political affiliation. The personal paper trail. Personal buying habits, that is, personal consumer preferences. 1. Checking accounts. 2. Credit card purchases. 3. Tagged credit card purchases. The credit card purchase of products bearing the UPC Universal Product Code. Assets. 1. Checking accounts. 2. Savings accounts. 3. Real estate. 4. Business. 5. Automobiles, etc. 6. Safety deposit at bank. 7. Stock market liabilities. 1. Creditors. 2. Enemies. C. Legal. 3. Loans. 4. Consumer credit. Government sources, ploys. 1. Welfare. 2. Social security. 3. USDA surplus food. 4. Doles. 5. Grants. 6. Subsidies. Principle of this ploy, The citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle of eat now, and pay later. Government sources, via intimidation: 1. Internal Revenue Service, 2. OSHA, 3. Census, 4, etc. Other government sources: surveillance of U.S. mail. Habit patterns, programming strengths and weaknesses: 1. Activities, sports, hobbies, etc. 2. See legal, fear, anger, etc. Crime record. 3. Hospital records, drug sensitivities, reaction to pain, etc. 4. Psychiatric records, fears, angers, disgusts, adaptability, reactions to stimuli, violence, suggestibility or hypnosis, pain, pleasure, love, and sex. Methods of coping, of adaptability, behavior: 1. Consumption of alcohol, 2. Consumption of drugs, 3. Entertainment, 4. Religious factors influencing behavior, 5. Other methods of escaping from reality: payment modus operandi, MO, pay on time, etc. 1. Payment of telephone bills, 2. Energy purchases, electrical, gas, 3. Water purchases, 4. Repayment of loans, 5. House payments, 6. Automobile payments, 7. Payments on credit cards. Political sensitivity: 1. Beliefs, 2. Contacts, 3. Position, 4. Strengths, weaknesses, 5. Projects, activities. Legal inputs, behavioral control, excuses for investigation, search, arrest, or employment of force to modify behavior: 1. Court records, 2. Police records, NSIC, 3. Driving record, 4. Reports made to police, 5. Insurance information, 6. Anti-establishment acquaintances. National input information: business sources, via IRS, etc. 1. Prices of commodities, 2. Sales, 3. Investments in A. Stocks, inventory, B. Production tools and machinery, C. Buildings and improvements, D. The stock market. Banks and credit bureaus: 1. Credit information, 2. Payment information. Miscellaneous sources: 1. Polls and surveys, 2. Publications, 3. Telephone records, 4. Energy and utility purchases. Short list of outputs. Outputs: create controlled situations, manipulation of the economy, hence society, control of compensation and income. Sequence: 1. Allocates opportunities, 2. Destroys opportunities, 3. Controls the economic environment, 4. Controls the availability of raw materials, 5. Controls capital, 6. Controls bank rates, 7. Controls the inflation of the currency, 8. Controls the possession of property, 9. Controls industrial capacity, 10. Controls manufacturing, 11. Controls the availability of goods, commodities, 12. Controls the prices of commodities, 13. Controls services, the labor force, etc. 14. Controls payments to government officials, 15. Controls the legal functions, 16. Controls the personal data files, uncorrectable by the party standard, 17. Controls advertising, 18. Controls media contact, 19. Controls material available for TV viewing, 20. Disengages attention from real issues, 21. Engages emotions, 22. Creates disorder, chaos, and insanity, 23. Controls design of more probing tax forms, 24. Controls surveillance, 25. controls the storage of information. 26. Develops psychological analyses and profiles of individuals. 27. Controls legal functions, repeat of 15. 28. Controls sociological factors. 29. Controls health options. 30. Preys on weakness. 31. Cripples strengths. 32. Leaches wealth and substance. The artificial womb. From the time a person leaves its mother's womb, its every effort is directed towards building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs, various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, to provide a shelter for the evolutionary processes of growth and maturity, that is, survival, to provide security for freedom and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. This is equally true of both the general public and the elite. However, there is a definite difference in the way each of these classes go about the solution of problems. The political structure of a nation, dependency. The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human god to eliminate all risk from their life, pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on every dinner table, clothe their bodies, tuck them into bed at night, and tell them that everything will be all right when they wake up in the morning. This public demand is incredible, so the human god, the politician, meets incredibility with incredibility by promising the world and delivering nothing. So who is the bigger liar? The public? Or the Godfather? This public behavior is surrender born of fear, laziness, and expediency. It is the basis of the welfare state as a strategic weapon, useful against a disgusting public. Action, offense. Most people want to be able to subdue and or kill other human beings which disturb their daily lives, but they do not want to have to cope with the moral and religious issues which such an overattack on their part might raise. Therefore, they assign the dirty work to others, including their own children, so as to keep the blood off their hands. They rave about the humane treatment of animals and then sit down to a delicious hamburger from a whitewashed slaughterhouse down the street and out of sight. But even more hypocritical, they pay taxes to finance a professional association of hitmen collectively called politicians, and then complain about corruption in government. Responsibility again. Most people want to be free to do the things, to explore, etc., but they are afraid to fail. The fear of failure is manifested in irresponsibility, and especially in delegating those personal responsibilities to others where success is uncertain or carries possible or created liabilities, law, which the person is not prepared to accept. They want authority, root word, author, but they will not accept responsibility or liability. So they hire politicians to face reality for them. Summary. The people hire the politicians so that the people can, 1. Obtain security without managing it. 2. Obtain action without thinking about it. 3. Inflict theft, injury, and death upon others without having to contemplate either life or death. 4. Avoid responsibility for their own intentions. 5. Obtain the benefits of reality and science without exerting themselves in the discipline of facing or learning either of these things. They give the politicians the power to create and manage a war machine. 1. Provide for the survival of the nation, whom. 2. Prevent encroachment of anything upon the nation, whom. 3. Destroy the enemy who threatens the nation, whom. 4. Destroy those citizens of their own country who do not conform for the sake of stability of the nation, whom politicians hold many quasi-military jobs, the lowest being the police, which are soldiers, the attorneys and CPAS next, who are spies and saboteurs, licensed, and the judges who shout orders and run the closed union military shop for whatever the market will bear. The generals are industrialists. The presidential level of commander-in-chief is shared by the international bankers. The people know that they have created this farce and financed it with their own taxes, consent, but they would rather knuckle under than be the hypocrite. Thus, a nation becomes divided into two very distinct parts, a docile subnation, great silent majority, and a political subnation. The political subnation remains attached to the docile subnation, tolerates it, and leaches its substance until it grows strong enough to detach itself and then devour its parent. Time-flow relationships and self-destructive oscillations in ideal industry may be symbolized electronically in various ways. The simplest way is to represent a demand by a voltage and a supply by a current. When this is done, the relationships between the two becomes what is called an admittance, which can result from three economic factors: 1. Hindsight flow, 2. Present flow, and 3. Foresight flow. Foresight flow is the result of that property of living entities to cause energy, food, to be stored for a period of low energy, for example, a winter season. It consists of demands made upon an economic system for that period of low energy, winter season. In a production industry it takes several forms, one of which is known as production stock or inventory. In electronic symbology, this specific industry demand, a pure capital industry, is represented by capacitance and the stock or resources represented by a stored charge. Satisfaction of an industry demand suffers a lag because of the loading effect of inventory priorities. Present flow ideally involves no delays. It is, so to speak, input today for output today, a hand-to-mouth flow. In electronic symbology, this specific industry demand, a purus industry, is represented by a conductance, which is then a simple economic valve, a dissipative element. Hindsight flow is known as habit or inertia. In electronics, this phenomenon is the characteristic of an inductor. Economic analog equals a pure service industry, in which a current flow, economic analog equals flow of money, creates a magnetic field. Economic analog equals active human population, which, if the current, money flow, begins to diminish, collapse, war, to maintain the current, flow of money, energy. Other large alternatives to war as economic inductors or economic flywheels are an open-ended social welfare program, or an enormous, but fruitful, open-ended space program. The problem with stabilizing the economic system is that there is too much demand on account of 1. Too much greed and 2. Too much population. This creates excessive economic inductance, which can only be balanced with economic capacitance, true resources or value, for example, in goods or services. The social welfare program is nothing more than an open-ended credit balance system which creates a false capital industry to give non-productive people a roof over their heads and food in their stomachs. This can be useful, however, because the recipients become state property in return for the gift, a standing army for the elite. For he who pays the piper picks the tune. Those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix. In this, the method of introducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world. This is a fourth law of motion, onset, and consists of performing an action and leaving the system before the reflected reaction returns to the point of action, a delayed reaction. The means of surviving the reaction is by changing the system before the reaction can return. By this means, politicians become more popular in their own time and the public pays later. In fact, the measure of such a politician is the delay time. The same thing is achieved by a government by printing money beyond the limit of the gross national product, an economic process called inflation. This puts a large quantity of money into the hands of the public and maintains a balance against their greed, creates a false self-confidence in them and, for a while, stays the wolf from the door. They must eventually resort to war to balance the account, because war ultimately is merely the act of destroying the creditor, and the politicians are the publicly hired hitmen that justify the act to keep the responsibility and blood off the public conscience. See section on consent factors and social economic structuring. If the people really cared about their fellow man, they would control their appetites, greed, procreation, etc., so that they would not have to operate on a credit or welfare social system which steals from the worker to satisfy the bum. Since most of the general public will not exercise restraint, there are only two alternatives to reduce the economic inductance of the system. 1. Let the populace bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in a total destruction of the living earth. 2. Take control of the world by the use of economic silent weapons in a form of quiet warfare and reduce the economic inductance of the world to a safe level by a process of benevolent slavery and genocide. The latter option has been taken as the obviously better option. At this point it should be crystal clear to the reader why absolute secrecy about the silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in its fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians, and, so to speak, a blight upon the face of the earth. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid war despite religious morality, and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problem unreachable to them. It is left to those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive, to solve the problem for themselves as the few who really care. Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of the future true humanity. If you made it to the end of my video, thank you for taking an hour to watch this video. If you enjoy this kinda of content, please like and subscribe for more strange and awakening, abnormal content. Please leave your comments below and let me know how you feel about what's going on. And give me your ideas as well. I look forward to hearing from all of you.